Final exam review, question 7. Given the interval estimate for the mean 7.2, comma 13.4, the point estimate for the mean is, and the margin of error is. So we know that the confidence interval in general is basically point estimate plus or minus the margin of error. In this case, we're dealing with the means, but it really does not matter what we're dealing with. In this case, we have the lower bound is equal to 7.2, which comes from point estimate minus margin of error. So I'm just going to write it here. So the lower bound is basically point estimate, which is in this case x bar, minus the margin of error. And then the upper bound, which is in our case, the upper bound is for 13.4. And it is equal to the point estimate plus the margin of error. Now, if you add these together, these two equations together, you will notice that the margin of error will cancel out, and we're going to have the upper bound, the lower bound, or the upper bound plus the upper bound equals 2 times x bar. But we only need the point estimate x bar, so we're going to divide both sides by 2. And in this case, as you can see here, we will have x bar, which is the point estimate, equals the upper bound plus the lower bound. It doesn't matter which one is first in this case because addition is commutative, divided by 2. In other words, if we add those two values together, the upper bound and the lower bound, and we divide the answer by 2, we will get the point estimate. So I'm just going to do the math here. Equals 7.2. And I should put them between parentheses because Excel does not understand to do the addition first. So 7.2 plus 13.4. If I did not include parentheses here, it's just going to divide 13.4 by 2 and then add 7.2 to it. So it does not understand. So the first answer, which is the point estimate in our case, is equal to 10.3. So this is basically x bar. In order to figure out the margin of error, so we will subtract the lower bound from the upper bound. So we're going to write it like so. We're going to say if we subtract, then the sign for the upper bound, the lower bound, sorry, is going to change from negative. This is going to change into negative, and this negative is going to change to positive because we're basically subtracting the lower bound from the upper bound. So it's as if you're multiplying the first equation by -1, and then you're adding the two equations together. So if we do that, let me erase what I did here. We're going to end up with the upper bound, because that's the bigger amount, minus the lower bound. Again, we're going to include parentheses there. And then that will be equal to the point estimate is going to cancel with the point estimate, and we're going to have margin of error plus margin of error, which will end up giving us 2 margin of errors. So that is going to be 2 margin error. And we want just 1 margin of error, so we're going to divide both sides by 2. So the margin of error here, we can say it is equal to the upper bound, because that's the bigger amount, minus the lower bound, the smaller amount. And then we divide the answer by 2. Similar to this process, I need to put parentheses, so I'm just going to do the math here. I'm going to type 13.4, just a second here, 13.4 minus 7.2, and then I'll divide everything by 2. Or you could do them separately, do the subtraction first, and then you divide the answer, the result, by 2. So the answer in our case is 3.1, and that would be the margin of error. So the margin of error is equal to 3.1. Hopefully that will answer your question. If you do have any questions, let me know.